I was on my knees under a flower stand at midnight when the richest man in Chicago hid beneath my canvas awning, soaking wet in a $3,000 tuxedo. He looked terrified. I thought he was homeless. 3 months later, his grandmother offered me $10 million to disappear from his life. I refused. Now he's on one knee in a secret rooftop garden that nobody knows exists, holding his great-grandmother's emerald ring, and he's about to ask me something that will change everything forever.
Story based on true events. Names, locations, and some facts have been altered to preserve the privacy of those involved.
The jasmine flowers are falling around us like snow. The Chicago sunset is painting the sky impossible colors, and his hands are shaking as he opens his mouth to speak. I never thought a tuxedo could make someone look homeless, but there he was, crumpled under my flower stand at midnight, designer fabric covered in gutter water, looking more lost than the wilted daisies in my discount bucket. My name is Lana Mitchell, and I sell flowers in downtown Chicago. Not the fancy kind you see in magazine spreads or hotel lobbies. I'm talking about the barely holding on bouquets I arrange on a fold-out table in Grant Park, hoping someone will spend $12 on roses that'll last 3 days if they're lucky. I'm 28 years old, and I measure my success by whether I can afford both rent and groceries in the same week. Spoiler alert, it's usually one or the other. That night, September 14th, a Tuesday. I'll never forget. I was doing what I always did after the evening crowd disappeared, watering my remaining inventory, talking to the flowers like they were old friends, pretending the ache in my lower back didn't exist. The city hummed around me with that peculiar midnight energy, all distant sirens and the whisper of Lake Michigan wind cutting through the empty streets. Then I heard footsteps, running footsteps, fast. A figure came careening around the corner of East Monroe Street, moving like his life depended on it. In the orange glow of the streetlights, I caught flashes of detail: black bow tie askew, jacket flapping open, dress shoes that probably cost more than my entire month's earnings. He looked over his shoulder, panic written across features I couldn't quite make out in the shadows, and then, with the grace of a man who'd never had to hide from anything in his life, he dove under my flower stand's canvas awning. The whole structure shook. My bucket of tiger lilies tipped over, water spreading across the sidewalk. "Seriously?" I said to the expensive shoes sticking out from under my table. "Please," came a voice, breathless and desperate, muffled by polyester and desperation. "Please just pretend I'm not here." I bent down, getting a better look at my unexpected visitor. Even in the dim light, I could see he was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair disheveled in a way that probably looked artful in magazine shoots, but now just looked panicked. His eyes, even wide with fear, had this quality I couldn't name, something between exhausted and pleading. "Are you running from the cops?" I asked, because that seemed like relevant information. "No, worse." He glanced back toward the street corner. "Photographers." I almost laughed. In my world, the worst things you could run from were debt collectors and landlords with eviction notices, not people with cameras. But something about the genuine distress in his voice stopped me. "Photographers," I repeated, deadpan. "I know how it sounds, but please, I just need 60 seconds for them to pass." That's when I heard them. Voices. Multiple people. The sound of equipment. A group rounded the corner, maybe 6 or 7 people with professional cameras hanging from their necks, scanning the street like bloodhounds who'd lost the scent. "Anyone see where he went?" one of them called out. "Probably ducked into one of the buildings," another replied. I looked down at the man under my table, then at the photographers, then back at the man. Against every instinct that told me to mind my own business and not get involved in rich people problems, I did something incredibly stupid. I sat down on the curb, positioning myself to block their view of the awning, and started arranging flowers like I'd been there all along. The photographers approached. One of them, a woman with a camera that probably cost more than my car, stopped in front of my stand. "Hey, you been here long?" she asked. I looked up, keeping my expression bored. "All night. You see a guy in a tux run past? Dark hair, about 6'2"? Honey, I see lots of things at midnight in Chicago. None of them involve tuxedos." I held up a slightly wilted sunflower. "You want a flower? $7, special late-night price." She gave me a look that said she'd rather eat glass, then moved on with her pack. I watched them disappear down the street, their voices fading into the urban night sounds. Under my table, the man let out a breath so long it sounded like he'd been holding it for a year. They're gone, I said, not looking at him. You can come out now. He emerged slowly, unfolding himself from beneath the canvas with all the dignity of someone who'd just hidden under a flower stand at midnight. Up close, in the better light, I could see him properly for the first time. He was handsome in that way that came from good genetics and better skincare, with a jawline sharp enough to cut paper and eyes that were a striking shade of hazel. But it was his expression that caught me, this mixture of embarrassment and something else. Emptiness, maybe. Like someone had scooped out everything important and left just the shell. Thank you, he said, and his voice had this quality, educated, refined, the kind of voice that never had to ask for anything twice. You didn't have to do that. No, I didn't. I stood brushing dirt off my jeans. My apron, a canvas thing covered in soil stains and plant debris, hung crooked on my shoulders. But those people looked annoying. He laughed, a real laugh that seemed to surprise him. That's an understatement. We stood there for a moment in the strange intimacy that comes from shared secrets, even small ones. I took in the full picture of him. The tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, now rumpled and stained with street water. The bow tie hanging undone around his neck. The watch on his wrist that caught the streetlight. Definitely Rolex. Probably vintage. So, I said, picking up my tipped bucket, what's a guy in a $1,000 tuxedo doing running through Grant Park at midnight? 3,000, he said automatically, then seemed to regret it. The tuxedo, it's... Never mind. That's not important. Clearly. I started gathering my scattered flowers. You want to tell me why photographers are chasing you, or should I just assume you're a celebrity I'm supposed to recognize? God, I hope not. He bent down to help me, his expensive shoes squelching in the spilled water. I'm nobody. Just someone who went to the wrong party and said the wrong thing to the wrong person's daughter. Must have been some wrong thing. I told her I wasn't interested. He handed me a rose, its petals slightly crushed. Apparently, that's newsworthy when your family owns half the luxury hotels in the Midwest. The way he said it, so casual, so matter-of-fact, made my stomach twist. This was exactly the kind of person I'd spent my whole life watching from a distance. The ones who flew first class while I counted pennies for bus fare, who complained about champagne temperatures while I watered down my shampoo to make it last another week. Hotels, I said flatly. Right. Well, I'm glad my flower stand could provide adequate refuge for hotel royalty. He caught the edge in my voice, his expression shifting. I didn't mean... It's fine. I stood, holding my rescued flowers. You should probably go before they circle back. Take the alley behind the Art Institute. Fewer cameras. He didn't move. Instead, he looked at me with this intensity that made something flutter in my chest, a feeling I immediately distrusted. I'm Tiago, he said, extending his hand. Tiago Whitmore. I recognized the name immediately. The Whitmore Hotel Group. Their logo was on half the buildings in downtown Chicago. His family had the kind of wealth that appeared in Forbes articles and charity gala coverage. Old money mixed with new empire. The kind of people who lived in penthouses and summer homes and probably had never set foot in a laundromat. I looked at his extended hand but didn't take it. Lana, I said, and you really should go. Right. Of course. He withdrew his hand, looking oddly hurt. Then, in a gesture that seemed to surprise both of us, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. Let me at least pay for the trouble. No. The word came out harder than I intended. His hand froze, wallet half open, and I saw something flash across his face. Understanding, maybe. Or shame. I don't need your money, I continued, softer but firm. I helped you because those photographers were annoying, not because I wanted payment. That's not how kindness works in my world. He put the wallet away slowly, and the look he gave me, like I'd just said something profound instead of painfully obvious, made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Your world, he repeated quietly. Right. We stood there in the awkward aftermath of almost charity, the city breathing around us. A taxi passed, its headlights briefly illuminating us both. Me in my dirt-stained apron and secondhand jacket, him in his $3,000 tuxedo and probably $100 haircut. Well, I said finally, good luck with your photographer problem and your hotel empire and whatever else people like you worry about. People like me, he echoed, and there was something in his voice, not anger, but something sadder. Recognition, maybe, of the wall I was building between us. I turned back to my flowers, making it clear the conversation was over. I heard him take a few steps away, then stop. "The roses," he said. I glanced over my shoulder. "That one you're holding, it's wilting." He pointed to the flower in my hand, its petals drooping despite my best efforts. "Even beauty needs rest, right?" I stared at him, surprised he'd been paying attention, surprised he'd remembered my earlier words to my flowers. "Something like that," I managed. He smiled, a real smile this time, nothing practiced about it, and then he was gone, disappearing into the Chicago night like he'd never been there at all. I should have forgotten about him. I should have gone back to my normal midnight routine and pushed the whole bizarre encounter out of my mind. But as I packed up my flowers and loaded my ancient Ford Fiesta, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me, like I was something surprising. Like I'd shown him something he'd never seen before. Stupid, I told myself. He's probably already back in his penthouse, laughing about the poor flower girl who helped him escape the paparazzi. But I kept that wilted rose. I put it in a jar of water when I got home to my studio apartment in Pilsen, where the radiator clanked and the neighbors' music bled through the walls. I told myself it was just because I hated wasting flowers. I didn't expect to see him again. I definitely didn't expect him to show up at my flower stand the next night, wearing jeans and a hoodie that looked suspiciously brand new, like he'd bought them specifically to look less wealthy. "Hi," he said, and the nervousness in his voice was almost endearing. I wanted to apologize. For last night. For the wallet thing. I was arranging peonies and I didn't look up. Apology accepted. You can go now. I also wanted to buy some flowers. That made me look at him. He was trying so hard to appear casual, hands shoved in his pockets, that expensive watch notably absent from his wrist. The hoodie was definitely new. I could see the fold lines from the package. "You want to buy flowers?" I said skeptically. "Yes." "What kind?" He looked at my display like it was a final exam he hadn't studied for. The pretty ones?" Despite myself, I smiled. "Very specific. I don't actually know anything about flowers," he admitted. "I just wanted an excuse to come back and talk to you properly, without hiding under your table or insulting you with my wallet." His honesty caught me off guard. In my experience, wealthy people didn't admit to not knowing things. They especially didn't admit to wanting to talk to poor people. "Why?" I asked. "Why what? Why do you want to talk to me? You got away from the photographers. You apologized. What else could you possibly want from someone in my world?" He flinched at that last part, but he didn't look away. "Maybe I want to know what your world is like. Mine's pretty disappointing, to be honest." "Disappointing," I repeated, gesturing to my fold-out table and discount flowers. "The guy with the hotel empire finds his life disappointing. The guy who's never had to make a single real choice in his life," he corrected. "Who was engaged to someone he'd never loved before he could legally drink. Who wakes up in penthouses and feels like he's suffocating. Yeah, that guy finds it disappointing." The bitterness in his voice was real. So was the pain. I recognized it because I'd felt something similar, though from the opposite direction. The suffocation that came from having too few choices, not too many. "So you're slumming it," I said. "Having your pretty woman moment with the working-class flower girl." "That's not—" He stopped, frustrated. "I'm doing this badly." "Yes, you are. Can I start over?" "That depends. Are you going to try to buy me?" "No." He held up his hands in surrender. "No money, no charity, no pretty woman moments, just conversation. That's all I'm asking for." I should have said no. I should have recognized the warning signs, the rich guy looking for an adventure, the class divide that would inevitably cause problems, the fact that his grandmother probably had old money opinions about people like me. I should have protected myself. But there was something about the way he looked at my flowers, curious and genuine, something about the way he'd quoted my own words back to me last night, like he'd actually listened. "Fine," I said. "You can help me set up. But you're going to learn the actual names of flowers, not just call them the pretty ones." His face lit up like I'd given him something precious. Deal. And that's how it started. Tiago Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore Hotel Group, showed up at my flower stand every night for the next week. He learned to tell roses from peonies, carnations from chrysanthemums. He helped me haul buckets of water and arrange bouquets while we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in ballrooms and boardrooms, how his grandmother, the family matriarch, had planned his entire life before he could walk, how she'd arranged his engagement to Amanda Rothschild, daughter of another hotel dynasty when he was 22, how he'd gone along with it because he'd never known you could say no to your own life. I told him about growing up in Southside Chicago, how my mom had worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford to keep our apartment. How I'd started selling flowers at 19 because I was good with plants and terrible at job interviews. How I'd been engaged once too, to Marcus Chen, a guy from my neighborhood who'd wanted me to give up my flower stand for something real. How I'd chosen the flowers. "You chose beauty," Tiago said one night, as we sat on the curb outside my closed stand, the city settling into its late-night rhythm around us. "That's brave." "It's stupid," I corrected. "Beauty doesn't pay rent." "Neither does money, if you're using it to buy a life you don't want." I looked at him then, really looked at him. In the week since he'd started showing up, something had shifted. The practiced polish had worn away, revealing someone younger and more uncertain than the confident heir I'd first seen. He'd learned to laugh at himself, to ask questions instead of making assumptions, to find joy in small things, like the way morning glories closed at night, or how the smell of lavender changed when it rained. And I'd started to see past the obvious things, the wealth, the privilege, the different world he came from. Started to see someone who was just as trapped as I was, just in a gilded cage instead of a rusty one. "What happened with your engagement?" I asked. "I called it off. Finally. 3 days before I met you, actually." He picked at the frayed knee of his jeans. Still too new. Still wrong, somehow. "That's why the photographers were chasing me. Amanda's father is not pleased. I bet. My grandmother's worse. She says I'm throwing away the family legacy for a phase, that I'll regret destroying a perfectly good alliance." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She might be right." Or, I said carefully, "You might regret spending your life in a perfectly good prison." He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. We were sitting close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the earthy scent of flowers, close enough that I could see the exact moment his expression shifted from grateful to something else entirely. "Lana," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." My heart was doing something stupid and complicated in my chest. "What? This? Coming here every night, learning about your flowers, talking to you? It's not a phase. It's not slumming. It's the first time in my life I've felt like I could breathe." "Tiago, and you—" He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered, warm against my cheek. "You're the first person who's ever looked at me and not seen a bank account. Just me." I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him that we were from different worlds, that this couldn't work, that his grandmother would eat me alive and the photographers would destroy me. I should have been practical. Instead, I leaned closer. "This is a bad idea," I whispered. "The worst," he agreed, but he was leaning in too. The space between us shrank to nothing. I could feel the warmth of his breath, see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. My pulse was thundering in my ears, drowning out the rational part of my brain that was screaming warnings. "Last chance to run," I said. "Not going anywhere," he replied. Then he kissed me, and the whole world caught fire. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the kind of practiced kiss you saw in movies or read about in books. It was desperate and clumsy and perfect, like we were both diving off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. His hand came up to cup my face, calloused from the past week of working with flowers, and I grabbed the front of his hoodie to pull him closer. He tasted like coffee and mint and possibility, like every reckless decision I'd ever made, and every dream I'd been too practical to chase. The kiss deepened, and I felt something unlock in my chest, a door I'd kept closed for so long I'd forgotten it existed. When we finally broke apart, gasping, his forehead rested against mine. The city hummed around us, indifferent to the fact that my entire world had just tilted on its axis. "Oh God," I breathed. "What did we just do?" "Something stupid," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Something perfect. Something I've wanted to do since the moment you refused to take my money." I pulled back enough to look at him properly. His hair was messed up. My fault. My fingers had apparently decided to run through it during the kiss, and his eyes were bright with something between terror and joy. "Your grandmother's going to kill you," I said. "Probably. The photographers are going to have a field day." "Definitely. This is going to be so complicated." "Absolutely." He kissed me again, softer this time, sweet and slow like we had all the time in the world. When he pulled back, he was grinning. "Worth it, though." And looking at him, At this man who'd hidden under my flower stand and learned the names of every bloom I sold, who'd chosen to walk away from an empire rather than live a lie, who'd kissed me like I was the only real thing in his entire manufactured world. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was right. The night air wrapped around us, carrying the scent of flowers and possibility. In the distance, I could hear the lake lapping at the shore, the eternal rhythm of water against stone. Tomorrow would bring problems. His family, my insecurities, the impossible gap between our worlds. Tomorrow would bring reality. But tonight, sitting on a curb in Grant Park with dirt under my fingernails and Tiago Whitmore's hand in mine, I let myself believe in something I'd thought was reserved for other people. Something like magic. Something like fate. Something like love. Come back tomorrow? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Try to stop me, he said. And as I watched him disappear into the Chicago night, I touched my lips where the taste of him still lingered, and smiled. Part 2. The morning after our first kiss, I woke up convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. That Tiago Whitmore, hotel heir, penthouse dweller, man who probably had a trust fund bigger than my lifetime earnings, hadn't actually kissed me on a sidewalk in Grant Park while surrounded by wilting daisies and the smell of Lake Michigan. Then I saw the text message on my phone. Coffee? I promise not to hide under your table this time. I stared at those words for a full minute, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest, before reality crashed down like a bucket of ice water. What was I doing? This wasn't some romantic comedy where the rich guy and the poor girl lived happily ever after. This was real life, where class differences mattered and grandmothers who owned hotel empires didn't welcome flower sellers into the family with open arms. I should have said no. I should have protected myself. I texted back, Starbucks on Michigan Avenue, 7 a.m. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees and a nervous energy that made him look younger than 25. He'd gone back to the expensive clothes, designer jeans, a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but he wore them differently now. Less armor, more just him. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said as I sat down. I wasn't sure I would either. I took the coffee he offered. He'd remembered my order from a conversation 3 nights ago. Caramel macchiato with extra foam. The fact that he'd paid attention made something warm bloom in my chest. We should probably talk about what happened. The kiss. The kiss, I agreed. We sat in silence for a moment, the morning rush of downtown Chicago flowing around us. Business people in suits, tourists with cameras, the everyday chaos of a city waking up. Normal people living normal lives, not complicated messes involving hotel heirs and flower girls. I don't regret it, Tiago said finally. If that's what you're worried about. I know it's complicated. God, it's so complicated. But I don't regret it. Your grandmother's going to hate me. My grandmother hates everyone. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. But yeah, she's going to be difficult. Difficult, I repeated. That's one word for it. What I didn't say, I was terrified. Not just of his grandmother, but of the whole situation. Of falling for someone whose life was so far removed from mine that we might as well live on different planets. Of wanting something I had no business wanting. But when he laced his fingers through mine, all those rational fears seemed distant and unimportant. The next 2 months were the strangest, most wonderful time of my life. Tiago split his time between his world and mine, trying to exist in both simultaneously. During the day, he attended board meetings and charity galas, played the role of dutiful heir to the Whitmore empire. At night, he showed up at my flower stand in his jeans and hoodie, helping me arrange bouquets and making terrible jokes about peonies. We kept it secret, not because we were ashamed, but because the moment his grandmother found out, everything would explode, and neither of us was ready for that explosion. My best friend Sarah was the first to figure it out. She stopped by the stand one evening to find Tiago demonstrating his newly acquired skill at wrapping bouquets. Badly, but with enthusiasm. "Who's the cute guy?" she asked when he went to get more ribbon from my car. "Nobody," I said too quickly. "Lana, I've known you since high school. You're a terrible liar." She watched Tiago struggle with the ribbon through the window. "Also, that's a $300 sweater he's wearing. Where'd you meet Mr. Money?" I told her everything. About the midnight encounter, the photographers, the way he kept coming back. About the kiss that had changed everything. Sarah listened, her expression shifting from amused to concerned. "Lana, honey, do you know who that is?" "Tiago Whitmore." "Yes. I know. No, I mean, do you really know? She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo from some society blog. Tiago in a tuxedo at a gala, a beautiful blonde woman on his arm. That's Amanda Rothschild, his fiancée. Well, ex-fiancé as of last month, apparently. Their breakup was all over the news. I looked at the photo, at the woman who belonged in his world in a way I never could. Polished, elegant, someone who knew which fork to use at fancy dinners and probably had a degree from an Ivy League school. He told me about her, I said quietly, about the arranged engagement, about calling it off. And you believe him? Yes. Sarah sighed. Okay, but Lana, you need to be careful. These rich guys? He's not like that. You barely know him. I know enough. I met her eyes, willing her to understand. I know he shows up every night, even when he's exhausted from meetings. I know he's learned the name of every flower I sell because he actually listens when I talk. I know he looks at me like I'm something precious, not some charity case or fun distraction. And when his family finds out? When the photographers do? What then? I didn't have an answer for that. Neither did Tiago when I asked him the same question later that night. I don't know, he admitted. We were sitting on our usual curb, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. But I know I don't want to lose this. Lose you. Your grandmother? My grandmother has controlled my entire life. Where I went to school, who I dated, what job I'd have. I let her because it was easier than fighting. He turned to look at me, and the determination in his eyes made my breath catch. But this, you, is worth fighting for. 2 weeks later, the bomb dropped. I was at the stand arranging a wedding order when a black town car pulled up to the curb. The woman who emerged was in her 70s, impeccably dressed in Chanel, with steel gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. I recognized her immediately from the photos Tiago had shown me. Eleanor Whitmore, the family matriarch. Lana Mitchell, she said. Not a question. My mouth went dry. Mrs. Whitmore. We need to talk. She gestured to the car. Get in. I'm working. I'll buy every flower you have. Name your price. Her voice was cool, assured. The voice of someone who'd never heard the word no. Get in the car, Miss Mitchell. I should have refused, should have stood my ground. But something about her presence, the sheer force of her will, made my resolve crumble. I got in the car. She took me to the Whitmore Hotel flagship, the gleaming tower on North Michigan Avenue that I'd walked past 1,000 times but never entered. The lobby was all marble and gold, the kind of place where the doormen probably earned more than I did. Eleanor led me to a private dining room, sat across from me at a table that could seat 20, and got straight to the point. How much do you want? I blinked. Excuse me? To disappear from my grandson's life. I assume that's what this is about. You've seen an opportunity and you're taking it. So tell me your price. She opened a checkbook, pen poised. 50,000? 100? Be reasonable and we can settle this quickly. The casual way she said it, like I was a problem to be solved with money, made anger flare hot in my chest. I don't want your money. Everyone wants money, Miss Mitchell, especially people in your situation. Her eyes swept over my dirt-stained clothes, my calloused hands. You sell flowers on a street corner. You drive a car that should have been scrapped years ago. You live in a studio apartment in one of Chicago's worst neighborhoods. Don't pretend you're not tempted. I'm not. My voice came out steady despite the fury shaking through me. And even if I was, I wouldn't take it. Tiago isn't something you can buy away. Her expression hardened. Tiago is the heir to $1 billion empire. He has responsibilities, obligations that someone like you couldn't possibly understand. Someone like me. A girl with no education, no prospects, no understanding of the world he lives in. She leaned forward, and there was something almost pitying in her gaze. You think you love him? Perhaps you do in your limited way. But love isn't enough when you're dealing with empires and legacies. Is that what you told yourself when you arranged his engagement to Amanda? That love didn't matter? Amanda Rothschild was perfect for Tiago. Same background, same breeding, same understanding of what their marriage would mean for both families. Her voice turned sharp. You, on the other hand, would be a disaster. The press would eat you alive. The board would revolt. And Tiago, poor, infatuated Tiago, would wake up one day and realize he'd traded his birthright for a woman who can't even afford health insurance. Each word was designed to cut, and God help me, they worked. Because part of me, the scared, practical part, wondered if she was right. if I was being selfish, holding on to something that would ultimately hurt both of us. I'm giving you one chance to walk away gracefully, Eleanor continued. Take the money, start fresh somewhere else. I'll even help you set up a proper flower shop if you want. Consider it compensation for whatever you've given my grandson these past months. I stood up, my legs shaking but my voice clear. You can't buy me, and you can't control Tiago forever. He's going to make his own choices, whether you like them or not. His choices have consequences. For him, for the company, for hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on the Whitmore name remaining respectable. She stood as well, and despite her age, she was formidable. Are you really selfish enough to let him throw it all away for a fantasy? I left without answering. Walked out of that marble lobby, past the doormen and the luxury and the world where I'd never belong, and somehow made it back to my car before the tears started. Tiago found me an hour later, still sitting in my ancient Fiesta, crying in the parking lot of Grant Park. She came to see you, he said, sliding into the passenger seat. Not a question. My assistant told me she asked for your address. I told him everything. About the money, the checkbook, the clinical way she'd dissected every reason we shouldn't be together. I'm sorry, he said quietly. God, Lana, I'm so sorry. Is she right? The question came out broken. Am I being selfish? You could lose everything because of me. I've already lost everything that matters. He took my hand, pressed it to his chest where I could feel his heartbeat. Every version of my future she's planned, every expectation, every arranged marriage and boardroom and obligation. I lost all of that the moment I met you, and I don't want it back. Tiago, I love you. The words hung in the air between us, simple and devastating. I'm in love with you, Lana Mitchell, with your terrible car and your dirt-stained apron and the way you talk to flowers like they're people. With your stubbornness and your strength and the fact that you told my grandmother to go to hell. I didn't actually say that. You should have. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. I don't care about the empire or the money or any of it. I care about you. I wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. What if she's right about the rest? About me not belonging in your world? Then we'll make our own world. He cupped my face in his hands, thumbs brushing away my tears. One where it doesn't matter who has money or breeding or whatever else she thinks is important. One where the only thing that matters is this. He kissed me, and it felt like a promise, like a declaration of war against everyone who said we couldn't work. When we broke apart, I was still scared, still uncertain, but I was also determined. Your grandmother is going to make our lives hell, I said. Probably. The press will be brutal. Definitely. This is going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. Absolutely. He grinned, and despite everything, I felt hope flutter in my chest. Still in? I thought about Sarah's warnings, Eleanor's contempt, the massive gulf between our worlds. Thought about all the practical reasons this was a terrible idea. Then I thought about midnight conversations about flowers, about the way he looked at me like I'd hung the moon, about choosing love over fear. Still in, I said. The war with Eleanor Whitmore began in earnest. She leaked our relationship to the press, clearly hoping public scrutiny would drive us apart. Within days, my face was on gossip blogs and society pages. Mystery woman ensnares Whitmore heir, and from flower stand to fortune hunter. The photographers found my apartment, my stand, followed me to the grocery store and shouted questions about my intentions toward Tiago. Some articles painted me as a gold digger, others as a naive girl in over her head. None of them bothered to ask me who I actually was. Sarah helped me field the worst of it, screening calls and blocking particularly nasty comments on social media. You're trending on Twitter, she informed me one morning, scrolling through her phone with a grimace. And not in a good way. Let me guess. More fortune hunter theories? That, plus some creative speculation about your motives, your past, and whether you're secretly a Russian spy. She looked up. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I lied. The truth was, I was drowning. The attention was overwhelming, invasive, cruel. People I'd never met had opinions about my relationship, my character, my worth as a human being. My flower stand business had dropped off. Some people avoided me out of respect for my privacy, others because they'd decided I was a villain. But Tiago weathered it with me. He gave a statement to the press, making it clear that our relationship was real and serious. Stepped down from several board positions to distance himself from family pressure. started looking for an apartment of his own, away from the Whitmore properties and his grandmother's control. "You don't have to do this," I told him one night, watching him pack boxes in his penthouse. "Give up everything for me. I'm not giving up anything that matters." He wrapped a frame in newspaper, a photo of us from the flower stand. Sarah had sneaked it when we weren't looking. "I'm choosing what I want for once in my life. That's not a sacrifice. That's freedom." 3 months after Eleanor's ambush, Tiago asked me to meet him at the flagship hotel. I almost refused. I'd avoided the place since that terrible conversation, but something in his voice made me agree. He met me at a side entrance, away from the main lobby and its prying eyes, led me through service corridors I didn't know existed, up staircases that hadn't seen guests in decades. We climbed higher and higher, past the penthouse floors, past the mechanical rooms, until we reached a door marked Roof Access, authorized personnel only. "Are we allowed to be here?" I asked as he produced a key. "I'm a Whitmore. I'm allowed everywhere." He pushed open the door, and my breath caught. The roof had been transformed into a secret garden. I don't know how else to describe it. There were plants everywhere, climbing trellises and hanging baskets, raised beds bursting with flowers. In the center, under a canopy of jasmine that must have been growing for years, was a small clearing with a vintage wrought iron bench. I couldn't finish the sentence. "My grandfather built it," Tiago explained, his voice soft with memory. "For my grandmother, actually, back when they were first married. Before the company became everything. Before she became..." He trailed off. "He used to bring her up here when the city got too loud. She stopped coming after he died. The garden was beautiful and heartbreaking, a testament to a love story that had somehow gone wrong. I could see it in the care taken with each plant, the way the jasmine had been trained to create a living roof over the bench. Someone had loved deeply here once." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Tiago took my hand, leading me to the bench under the jasmine. The flowers were in full bloom, their sweet scent mixing with the cooler air of early evening. The sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment, we were suspended above the city, above all its noise and judgment and complications. "Because I wanted you to know," he said, "that love runs in my family, even if Eleanor's forgotten it, even if she's let it turn into something hard and calculating." He knelt down on the rooftop, and my heart stopped. "I haven't forgotten, and I won't." He pulled out a box, vintage, the kind that had been passed down through generations. Inside was a ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds, clearly antique and clearly precious. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "Not Eleanor, my great-grandmother, Rose Whitmore. She was a schoolteacher who married into the family back when they only owned one hotel. According to family legend, she refused my great-grandfather's first 3 proposals because she didn't trust rich men. On the 4th try, he brought her to this roof, it was just being built, and promised her a garden. She said yes. Tears were streaming down my face, and I couldn't speak. Lana Mitchell," Tiago continued, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You've taught me what it means to choose my own life, to find joy in small things, to be brave enough to want something that scares me. You've made me believe that love doesn't have to come with contracts and expectations and arranged futures." He took my hand, and I felt the calluses on his fingers, earned from months of working with flowers, from choosing to live in my world as much as his. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not because our families arranged it, not because it makes sense on paper, but because I love you and I want to build a garden with you. Our own garden, where we make our own rules." I was crying too hard to speak, so I just nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, a perfect fit, like it had been waiting for me, and kissed me under the jasmine canopy while the sun set over Chicago. It felt like a beginning, like a promise that some love stories, despite everything, find a way. "Eleanor's going to kill us," I said when we finally broke apart. "Let her try." He grinned. "We'll just hide under your flower stand again." We decided to get married quickly and quietly, before Eleanor could mount any serious opposition. No big wedding, no society pages, no press release. Just us, our love, and the people who actually mattered. Sarah helped me find a dress. Simple, white, beautiful without being extravagant. Tiago's best friend Marcus, one of the few people from his old life who'd supported our relationship, agreed to be his witness. We planned it for a Saturday morning at City Hall, 2 weeks after the proposal. The night before the wedding, Eleanor made one last attempt. She showed up at my apartment, my tiny, shabby apartment that I'd been planning to leave anyway, with a final offer. $5 million, she said, standing in my doorway like a general surveying a battlefield. And I'll ensure you never work again if that's what you want. But you don't marry him. No. 10 million? The answer's still no, Mrs. Whitmore. Her expression shifted, something almost like respect flickering across her features. You really love him. More than your money, definitely. She was quiet for a moment, studying me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. My husband brought me flowers, she said finally. Every Friday for 40 years, until the day he died. Daisies, because they were cheap and cheerful, and I'd told him once that I liked them. Her voice softened, became something almost human. I didn't marry him for love. It was arranged, practical. But he brought me flowers anyway, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with him despite my best efforts. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Eleanor I'd met before, the cold matriarch with her checkbook and threats. I don't approve of this marriage, she continued, the steel returning to her voice. I think you're wrong for each other in every measurable way, but I've been wrong before. She reached into her purse, pulled out an envelope. This is the deed to the roof garden. I haven't been up there since Robert died. Couldn't bear it, but Tiago should have it, for his bride. She left before I could thank her, disappearing down the stairs like a ghost from a more complicated past. We got married the next morning at 10 a.m., with Sarah and Marcus as witnesses and a judge who probably did 50 ceremonies a week. I wore my simple dress and carried a bouquet I'd made myself, roses and jasmine from the roof garden, tied with ribbon Tiago had struggled to learn how to work with. There was no music, no flower girls, no elaborate ceremony, just vows we'd written ourselves, words about choosing each other despite impossible odds, about building gardens in unexpected places, about love that refuses to be practical or sensible or any of the things it's supposed to be. When the judge pronounced us married and Tiago kissed me, I thought about the first time our lips met on that sidewalk in Grant Park, how far we'd come from that midnight encounter under my flower stand. Mrs. Whitmore, Tiago whispered against my mouth. Don't get used to it, I whispered back. I'm keeping Mitchell. Of course you are. We celebrated with deep dish pizza at Lou Malnati's and champagne that Sarah had smuggled in. Marcus told embarrassing stories about Tiago's prep school days, and Sarah showed me photos she'd been secretly taking of us since the beginning, proof that love could be documented even when it wasn't supposed to exist. That night, in the apartment we'd rented together, not his penthouse, not my studio, but something in between, Tiago and I lay in bed watching the city lights paint patterns on the ceiling. Do you regret it? I asked. Giving up everything for this? He pulled me closer, his hand finding mine, the wedding band he'd placed there catching the light. I didn't give up everything. I gave up the wrong everything to find the right something. That's very philosophical. That's what love does. Makes you philosophical. He kissed my temple. Ask me again in 50 years if I regret marrying the woman who once thought I was a homeless man in a tuxedo. I never thought you were homeless. Just elegantly displaced. Much better. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, two people from different worlds who'd somehow found a way to build a bridge between them. Outside, Chicago hummed with its endless energy, and somewhere across town, Eleanor Whitmore probably plotted her next move. But in that moment, none of it mattered. We had each other, a roof garden full of jasmine, and a future we'd chosen instead of inherited. And honestly, that felt like more than enough. Part 3. Marriage, I discovered, was both easier and harder than I'd expected. Easier because waking up next to Tiago every morning felt like the most natural thing in the world. Harder because the rest of the world still hadn't gotten the memo that we were allowed to be happy. The gossip blogs had a field day with our secret wedding. Whitmore heir elopes with flower girl, and lover gold digger, inside the shocking marriage, dominated the society pages for weeks. Eleanor maintained a frosty silence, neither condemning nor blessing the union, which somehow felt worse than outright opposition. But we built our life anyway, piece by piece. I kept my flower stand. Tiago insisted, said he fell in love with me there and didn't want that to change. He started working for a smaller hotel chain, one where his last name didn't open every door automatically, where he had to prove himself on merit. We lived in our modest 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drove my ancient Fiesta until it finally died, then bought a sensible used Honda together. It wasn't the life either of us had imagined. It was better. 4 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, everything changed. I was working on a special order, an anniversary arrangement for a couple celebrating 50 years together, when the world tilted sideways. One moment I was wrapping roses in tissue paper. The next I was on the floor of my flower stand, Sarah's panicked face swimming above me. Lana, can you hear me? I'm fine, I tried to say, but my voice came out wrong, distant. You just collapsed. You're not fine. She had her phone out, was already dialing. I'm calling 911. Don't! But the protest died on my lips as another wave of dizziness hit. The smell of the flowers, usually comforting, suddenly made my stomach revolt. The paramedics arrived, asked questions I couldn't quite focus on. When was your last period? Any chance you could be pregnant? Medical history? Pregnant. The word echoed in my head, impossible and terrifying, and somehow exactly right. They took me to Northwestern Memorial, Sarah following in her car, trying to reach Tiago. I lay on the gurney watching the Chicago sky pass overhead through the ambulance windows, one hand pressed to my stomach where nothing had changed but everything might have. Tiago burst into the emergency room like a man possessed, still wearing his work clothes, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit he'd developed when stressed. What happened? Are you okay? Sarah said you collapsed. I'm fine, I said, catching his hand, but they want to run some tests. The doctor who came in was young, efficient, with kind eyes that had probably delivered this news 1,000 times. She asked the same questions the paramedics had, then gently pressed on my abdomen, listening with her stethoscope to sounds I couldn't hear. When was your last period, Mrs. Whitmore? Mitchell, I corrected automatically. I kept my name, and I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago? I haven't been regular since... I stopped, realization dawning. Since the wedding. Since the stress of everything had thrown my cycle off, or so I'd assumed. I'd like to run a pregnancy test, the doctor said, just to rule it out. Tiago's hand tightened on mine. I couldn't look at him, couldn't see whatever expression was on his face. We'd never talked about kids, hadn't had time to talk about anything beyond surviving each day of being us. The test took 10 minutes, the longest 10 minutes of my life. When the doctor returned, she was smiling. Congratulations. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. The world stopped spinning. Or maybe it started spinning faster, I couldn't tell. All I could hear was my heartbeat, loud and insistent, and Tiago's sharp intake of breath beside me. Pregnant? I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. Approximately 8 weeks based on the preliminary test. We'll want to schedule an ultrasound to confirm, get you started on prenatal vitamins, discuss dietary changes. The doctor was still talking, but I couldn't focus on her words. 8 weeks. I was growing a human being. Tiago's child. Our child. I finally looked at him. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely, but underneath it something else. Wonder, maybe? Or terror. Possibly both. Could you give us a moment? Tiago asked the doctor, his voice hoarse. She nodded, left us alone in the small examination room with its sterile white walls and the hum of medical equipment. So, I said into the silence. That happened. A baby. He said it like he was testing the word, seeing how it felt in his mouth. We're having a baby. Apparently. My hand drifted to my stomach again. Still flat. Still unchanged. Impossible to believe there was a life growing there, a tiny cluster of cells that would become a person. I'm sorry. I know we didn't plan this. Don't. He caught my hand, pressed it between both of his. Don't apologize. This is... God, Lana, this is... He couldn't seem to finish the sentence, but his eyes were wet. Terrifying? I offered. Terrifying, he agreed. And perfect. And completely insane. And I can't believe we're going to be parents. We're going to be terrible at it, I said, but I was smiling now, the reality starting to sink in. We can barely take care of ourselves. We'll figure it out. We figured out everything else. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. A baby? Our baby. The fear was still there. How would we afford this? Where would we put a crib in our small apartment? What did we know about raising children? But underneath it, growing stronger with each passing second, was joy. Pure, unexpected, overwhelming joy. I love you, Tiago whispered. You and whoever's growing in there. Even though I'm going to be huge and cranky and probably cry at everything, especially then. Sarah was waiting in the lobby when we emerged, bouncing on her heels with anxiety. Well, what did they say? Are you okay? I looked at Tiago, who nodded encouragement. I'm pregnant, I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. We're having a baby. Sarah screamed, right there in the hospital lobby, causing several people to turn and stare. Then she was hugging me, crying into my shoulder, saying something about being an aunt and throwing the best baby shower Chicago had ever seen. You're happy? I asked when she finally released me. Happy? I'm ecstatic. This is the best news. She stopped, her expression shifting to concern. Wait. Are you happy? I mean, it's fast and with everything going on with the family. I'm terrified, I admitted. But yeah, I'm happy. The pregnancy hit me like a freight train. Morning sickness was a lie. I was sick all day, every day, for the first 3 months. The smell of flowers, my livelihood and passion, made me violently nauseous. I had to hire Sarah to run the stand while I spent my days alternating between the bathroom and the couch, eating crackers and trying not to move too quickly. Tiago was incredible. He held my hair back when I was sick, brought me ginger ale and bland food, rubbed my feet when they swelled. He read pregnancy books obsessively, highlighting passages and asking our doctor questions at every appointment. He turned into a pregnancy encyclopedia, spouting facts about fetal development at random moments. Did you know the baby can hear sounds from outside the womb at 18 weeks? He informed me one evening, his hand resting on my still small bump. We should start reading to them. The baby is the size of a bell pepper right now. I don't think they care about literature. You don't know that. Maybe we're raising a genius bell pepper. Despite the sickness and exhaustion, there was something magical about it. Watching my body change, feeling the first flutters of movement at 16 weeks, seeing the wonder on Tiago's face during ultrasounds when we caught glimpses of tiny hands and feet. We found out we were having a girl at 20 weeks. Tiago cried in the doctor's office, holding my hand while staring at the grainy ultrasound image like it was the Mona Lisa. A daughter, he kept saying. We're having a daughter. Eleanor maintained her distance for the first 5 months of the pregnancy. No calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that her only grandchild was on the way. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Not for me, but for Tiago. I watched him check his phone hopefully after each doctor's appointment, saw his expression fall when there were no messages from his grandmother. Then, in my 6th month, she appeared at our apartment door. May I come in? She asked, and there was something different about her. Softer, maybe, though she still wore her armor of designer clothes and perfect posture. Of course. I stepped aside, acutely aware of my swollen belly, my oversized maternity clothes, my hair in a messy bun. Next to her Chanel elegance, I felt like a disaster. She sat in our modest living room, looking around at the mismatched furniture and the photos on the walls, mostly of us, some of Sarah, the life we'd built together. I came to apologize, she said finally. I nearly fell over. Tiago, who'd just emerged from the kitchen, actually did stumble. You came to what? He asked. Apologize, to both of you. Eleanor's hands were clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. I've been unfair. Cruel, even. I let my fear of losing control, of the family legacy changing, override everything else. Grandmother, let me finish, please. She took a breath and I saw how much this cost her. A woman who never admitted weakness, never showed vulnerability. My husband brought me flowers every Friday for 40 years. Daisies because they were cheap and I told him I liked them. I stopped appreciating them somewhere along the way. Stopped appreciating him. After he died, I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that again. I built walls, made the company my entire world, forgot what it felt like to choose love over logic. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. You reminded me of myself, Lana, before I became hard, before I let fear dictate my choices, and instead of seeing that as a gift, I tried to destroy it. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. For the money, for the cruel things I said, for trying to buy you away from him. You were right. Love isn't something you can price. Tiago sat down heavily, like his legs wouldn't support him anymore. Why now? He asked quietly. Why come here after all these months? Eleanor smiled. sad and small, because I'm going to be a great-grandmother, and I've already wasted too much time being angry instead of grateful. She stood, crossed to where I sat, and gently placed her hand on my belly. May I? I nodded, too shocked to speak. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, right against Eleanor's palm. The expression that crossed her face, wonder, joy, regret, made my throat tight. A girl, she whispered. How did you… Tiago's assistant may have mentioned it. She had the grace to look sheepish. I've been keeping tabs, from a distance, just wanting to know you were both okay. You could have called, Tiago said, but there was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion and longing. I was afraid you'd hang up, or worse, that you'd be kind about it. Eleanor returned to her seat, composing herself. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I'd like, to be part of her life, if you'll allow it. Tiago looked at me, the question clear in his eyes. This was my choice too. I thought about the woman who'd tried to buy me off, who'd called me a disaster and a gold digger. Thought about the months of silence, the pain it had caused. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect our daughter from someone who'd been so cruel. But I also thought about second chances, about gardens built on rooftops by people in love, about choosing hope over fear. On one condition, I said finally, anything. You teach her about her great-grandfather, the man who brought his wife daisies every Friday, the one who knew love was worth more than logic. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears again. I can do that. She started visiting regularly after that, slowly rebuilding bridges she'd nearly burned beyond repair. She and Tiago talked about his grandfather, about the early days of the company, about the ways Eleanor had let her fear poison the legacy Robert had built with love. It wasn't easy. There were arguments and hurt feelings and moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but they worked at it. She even came to my flower stand once, bought every arrangement I had, and told Sarah she'd been right to protect me. Right about what? Sarah asked, confused. About demanding better for your friend. That kind of loyalty is rare. Eleanor handed her a business card. If you ever want a job with actual benefits and a salary that doesn't depend on weather conditions, call me. The flagship hotel could use someone in event planning with your organizational skills. Sarah looked at me, eyebrows raised in question. I nodded. She deserved something stable, something that didn't require her to rescue me from my various disasters. The last month of pregnancy was brutal. I was huge, uncomfortable, couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable, couldn't do anything except waddle around our apartment and complain. Tiago bore it all with infinite patience, rubbing my back at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, making midnight runs for bizarre food cravings, assembling baby furniture while I supervised from the couch. We'd turned the second bedroom into a nursery, pale yellow walls because we wanted something gender-neutral and cheerful, with hand-painted flowers I'd done in my second trimester when I still had energy. Tiago had insisted on hanging the piece Eleanor had given us, a framed photograph of his grandfather in the roof garden, holding a bouquet of daisies, smiling at someone off camera. Probably Eleanor, probably before life and loss had changed her. So she remembers where she comes from, he explained. Love and daisies and gardens built in unexpected places. I went into labor on a Tuesday night. Of course it was a Tuesday, the same day of the week I'd first met Tiago. Sarah always said I had a flair for the dramatic. The contractions started around dinner time, mild enough that I thought they were just more Braxton Hicks. By 9 p.m., they were impossible to ignore. By 11, we were at Northwestern Memorial, and I was cursing Tiago's entire existence. I hate you, I informed him during a particularly brutal contraction. This is all your fault. I know. I'm sorry. He held my hand, let me squeeze hard enough to cut off circulation. You're doing amazing! I'm not doing amazing, I'm dying. This is how I die. You're not dying. You're bringing life into the world. It's beautiful. If you say one more romantic thing right now, I will kill you. He wisely shut up. Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain and exhaustion and moments where I genuinely believed I couldn't do it, couldn't keep going. Sarah was there, feeding me ice chips and telling me I was stronger than I thought. Eleanor arrived sometime around dawn, bringing coffee for everyone except me, cruel but practical, and sitting quietly in the corner, hands clasped, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. And Tiago never left my side. He held my hand through every contraction, breathed with me, told me I was brave when I felt like a coward, loved me through the worst of it. At 8:47 a.m., our daughter was born. The moment they placed her on my chest, tiny, screaming, perfect, everything else disappeared. The pain, the exhaustion, every fear and doubt and moment of uncertainty. None of it mattered anymore. She was real. She was ours. "Oh my God," I whispered, touching her impossibly small hand with my finger. She gripped it immediately, her cry tapering off as she focused on my face with unfocused newborn eyes. "Tiago, look at her." He was crying, actually crying, tears streaming down his face as he stared at our daughter. "She's perfect. You're perfect. You both—" His voice broke. The nurse gave us a few minutes alone, just the three of us in our new configuration. I counted her fingers and toes, all present, all accounted for, traced the curve of her ear, the shock of dark hair on her head, the way her nose wrinkled when she yawned. "What should we name her?" Tiago asked, one finger stroking her cheek. We'd debated names for months, never settling on anything that felt quite right. But looking at her now, at this small person who'd fought her way into the world, I knew exactly what to call her. "Rose," I said, "for your great-grandmother, the one who chose love and built gardens." "Rose Mitchell Whitmore," Tiago said, testing it. Then he smiled. "It's perfect." They let Sarah and Eleanor in after the nurses had cleaned Rose up, and I'd attempted to nurse for the first time. An awkward, painful experience that no one had adequately warned me about. Sarah cried and took approximately 700 photos. Eleanor held Rose with a gentleness I didn't know she possessed, tears streaming silently down her face. "She has Robert's nose," she whispered, "and his hands. Look at her hands." "Would you like to say something to her?" I asked. "A blessing or welcome or whatever feels right?" Eleanor looked startled, then grateful. She bent close to Rose, spoke softly enough that only the baby could hear. But I saw her lips move, caught fragments. "Loved more than you know," and "built for you." And finally, clearly, "Welcome home, little one." We took Rose home 3 days later, terrified and clueless and completely in love. The first week was chaos. Neither of us knew what we were doing. Rose seemed to cry constantly. I was recovering from labor and learning to breastfeed and operating on approximately 45 minutes of sleep total. But there were perfect moments too. Tiago doing skin-to-skin contact at 3 a.m., Rose sleeping peacefully on his bare chest while he dozed in the rocking chair. The first time Rose opened her eyes and seemed to actually see me, focus on my face with something like recognition. Sarah bringing food and doing laundry and being the most incredible friend anyone had ever had. Eleanor stopping by with baby clothes and advice that was actually helpful, not judgmental. 1 month became 2, then 3. We found our rhythm, learned Rose's cries and cues, figured out the impossible puzzle of parenthood, one sleepless night at a time. I went back to the flower stand part-time, with Rose in a carrier on my chest, teaching her the names of flowers just like Tiago had once learned them. Eleanor offered us a bigger apartment, actually offered, not demanded, in one of the Whitmore buildings. We accepted, moving into a 3-bedroom with a view of Grant Park and enough space for Rose to grow. Tiago got promoted at work, his talent finally recognized on his own merit. Sarah took the job at the flagship hotel and thrived, planning events that got written up in Chicago Magazine. Life became fuller, richer, more complicated and beautiful than I'd ever imagined. On Rose's first birthday, we threw a party in the roof garden, the space that had witnessed our engagement, that symbolized everything we'd built together. Eleanor helped us decorate, stringing lights through the jasmine and setting up tables for friends and family. The cake was from a local bakery, nothing fancy, covered in buttercream flowers that looked like my arrangements. Rose took her first steps that day, wobbling between Tiago and me while everyone cheered. She face-planted immediately after, ending up with frosting in her hair and a delighted giggle that made everyone laugh. As the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in impossible colors, I stood at the edge of the garden with Tiago, Rose drowsy on his shoulder after her big day. "Do you remember?" I asked. "That first night when you hid under my flower stand?" "How could I forget? You thought I was a homeless guy in a tuxedo." "Elegantly displaced," I corrected. "And you offered me money. My lowest moment. Mine was probably letting you help with flower arrangements. You were terrible at it." "I've improved. Marginally." I leaned against him, careful not to wake Rose. "I wouldn't change any of it, though. Not the disaster beginning or Eleanor's attempts to buy me off. or the gossip blogs, or any of it. Not even the 14 hours of labor where you threatened to kill me? Well, maybe that part. I smiled, but not the result. Rose stirred, made a small noise, then settled back into sleep. Tiago kissed the top of her head, then mine. Sometimes I think about the life I was supposed to have, he said quietly. The arranged marriage, the boardroom career, the penthouse existence, and I can't imagine it anymore. Can't imagine a version of myself that didn't meet you, that didn't build this. This being our chaotic apartment and screaming baby and mothers-in-law who occasionally still makes things difficult. This being the only life I want, the only one that feels real. Below us, the city hummed with its endless energy. People living their lives, making their choices, building their own gardens in unexpected places. Some would work out, some wouldn't. Love was always a gamble, always uncertain. But standing there with my small family, in a garden built by people who'd loved before us and would love after us, I felt something I'd never expected to feel. Certainty. Not about what would happen tomorrow or next year or 20 years from now, but about this moment, this choice, this love. I should get back to the party, I said, but neither of us moved. In a minute, Tiago adjusted his hold on Rose, making sure she was comfortable. I want to remember this. Exactly this. A sleepy baby and a roof garden? A family. Our family. The one we chose. Eleanor found us there a few minutes later, worry lines creasing her forehead until she saw we were okay. She'd changed so much in the past year. Softer, more open, though still formidable when she needed to be. She'd become a presence in Rose's life, teaching her the names of flowers in the garden, telling her stories about her great-grandfather, showing her what it meant to choose love after loss. There you are, she said. People are asking for the birthday girl. She fell asleep, Tiago explained. Big day for a 1-year-old. Eleanor smiled, and it transformed her face. She's beautiful. Both of you, the three of you, are beautiful. She hesitated, then added, Robert would have loved this. The garden full of life again, great-granddaughter bearing his wife's name. He always said love was the only legacy that mattered. Do you believe that now? I asked. She looked at Rose, sleeping peacefully despite the party noise, then at me and Tiago. I'm learning to. You're teaching me. We returned to the party together, 3 generations navigating the complicated terrain of family and forgiveness. Sarah had organized games for the handful of children present, mostly her co-workers' kids, since Rose was too young to have friends yet. Friends from my flower stand mingled with Tiago's colleagues, worlds that shouldn't have intersected, but somehow did. As the evening wound down and guests departed with leftover cake and tired children, I found myself back at the jasmine bench with Sarah. Rose was with Tiago and Eleanor, the 3 of them examining flowers while Eleanor told stories. You did good, Sarah said, handing me a glass of wine, my first since before pregnancy. This whole life you built. It's pretty amazing. We did good, I corrected. You've been there for all of it. True, I am pretty incredible. She bumped my shoulder. Seriously though, I'm proud of you. Remember when you were convinced this was going to be a disaster? That his family would destroy you and the press would eat you alive? It was a disaster. Multiple times. But you survived it. Built something better than what anyone expected. She looked at me seriously. You taught me something, you know, about not letting fear make your choices, about fighting for what matters. Sarah, I'm seeing someone, she blurted out. Met her at the hotel. She's a wedding photographer, and she's funny and kind, and I really like her. And I'm terrified because what if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not brave enough for this? I took her hand. Then you'll figure it out. That's what brave people do. They don't skip the fear, they just don't let it win. She laughed, a little watery. When did you get so wise? Around the time I let a rich guy hide under my flower stand and changed my entire life. I squeezed her fingers. You're going to be fine. Better than fine. Tiago found me as the last guests were leaving, Rose back on his shoulder in her favorite sleeping position. Ready to go home? Home. A year ago, that had meant my studio apartment with its creaky pipes and thin walls. Now it meant a space we'd built together, filled with photos and memories and the detritus of our shared life. Somewhere along the way, without me quite noticing, home had become wherever the 3 of us were together. Yeah, I said. Let's go home. We drove through Chicago in the late evening, streetlights painting patterns across Rose's sleeping face. The city that had witnessed our beginning, that had judged and scrutinized and eventually accepted us, now felt like a witness to something larger. A love story that had refused to follow the script, that had insisted on its own ending. That night, after Rose was asleep in her crib and Tiago was dozing on the couch, I stood at our apartment window looking out at Grant Park. Somewhere down there was the spot where my flower stand used to be, where a man in a tuxedo had once hidden from photographers and changed my life. I thought about the girl I'd been, so certain she knew what was possible, what her life could contain. So convinced that love was for other people with better circumstances and fewer complications. She'd been wrong about so many things. Love wasn't something you found in perfect circumstances. It was something you built in impossible ones. It wasn't about having the same background or enough money or family approval. It was about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And maybe that was the lesson worth learning, the truth I needed to share. That love, real, messy, complicated love, isn't about waiting for the right moment or the perfect situation. It's about being brave enough to choose it anyway. To say yes to the scary thing, the uncertain thing, the thing that makes absolutely no sense on paper but feels right in your bones. I'd chosen a man who hid under my flower stand. He'd chosen a woman who couldn't afford health insurance. Together, we'd chosen a life that no one expected us to build. And looking at our daughter sleeping, at the man I'd married, at the garden we'd grown in an impossible place, I knew we'd made the right choice. So here's my question for you. What are you choosing? What love are you too afraid to reach for? What dream are you too practical to chase? What impossibility are you too sensible to attempt? Because here's what I learned, sitting on that curb in Grant Park all those months ago. The practical choice isn't always the right choice. The safe path isn't always the one that leads you home. And sometimes, the person in the tuxedo hiding under your flower stand is exactly the one you're supposed to find. Life is short. Love is shorter. Choose it anyway. Choose it especially when it's complicated and messy and everyone says it won't work. Choose it when it's scary. Choose it when it's hard. Choose your own garden. Build it with someone who makes you brave. Fill it with jasmine and impossible hope and the kind of love that refuses to be practical. And when your daughter asks you someday how you knew it was right, tell her the truth. You didn't know. You chose anyway. That's the only certainty that matters.